Ever catch yourself watching those special forces movies and think, could I actually, do that? Well, today's deep dive, this one's for you. We're going way past those Hollywood explosions, and we've got some serious intel from RoleCatcher.com for this.
Oh, yeah, RoleCatcher.
It's like having, a secret agent whispering career advice in your ear.
That's a great way to put it. They've got everything. CV tips, interview practice, you name it, all tailored to specific roles. And when it comes to special forces, they're really busting some myths.
Myths, huh? Okay, like what? I'll admit, I kind of still picture a special forces officer needing, mostly brawn, not necessarily a shelf full of PhDs.
Funny you should say that. One of the most surprising things RoleCatcher highlights is the brain power this career demands. And we're not talking just, basic smarts. They break it down by actual skills.
Break it down for me. Like, how important are we talking here? Give me the numbers.
Okay, get this. Reading comprehension. It's like a whopping 68% in terms of importance for a special forces officer. And right behind that is critical thinking at 61%.
Whoa, okay. Those are some stats that make a drill sergeant crack open a textbook. But why is reading comprehension so crucial in a field that's, known for action?
Because things change fast. Imagine, you're stationed overseas, right? You get a report, critical intel, maybe intercepted comms, maybe a tip from a local. Your ability to process that quickly, understand what it means, make a decision that could impact lives.
That's intense.
That's serious reading comprehension. This isn't like skimming a news feed. This is absorbing details under pressure.
So not just physically capable, but mentally sharp, making decisions with limited info. Pressure's on.
Exactly. And that need for strategic thinking, it only intensifies as you move up, which RoleCatcher breaks it down into 4 stages. You start as a trainee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Physical, tactical, but it evolves from there.
Walk us through those stages. How do responsibilities change as someone climbs the ranks?
So as you progress, leadership, strategic planning, those become key. By the time you're a senior special forces officer, it's less about direct action, more about shaping overall strategy, advising high-ranking officials, analyzing past missions.
Less storming the castle, more strategizing behind the scenes.
Precisely. Don't be surprised to see a senior special forces officer with a PhD. RoleCatcher points out that the strategic thinking at that level, often you need that advanced education. We're talking intellectual powerhouses here.
Okay, a PhD in special forces. Definitely not something you see in the movies. So what does RoleCatcher suggest for someone, intrigued by this path, especially today?
Well, they're upfront about how technology, especially AI, is changing things. Even getting your foot in the door needs a new approach.
AI and military recruitment. Okay, now that sounds like a Tom Clancy plot. Tell me more about this.
It's cutting-edge stuff. Your application might be analyzed by an algorithm before a human even sees it. RoleCatcher really emphasizes you got to optimize for these systems.
So how do you make your resume stand out to a supercomputer?
They have tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Analyze job descriptions, identify those keywords, even a feature that scores your CV's effectiveness, like a digital secret weapon for your job hunt.
It's like gaming the system, but in a good way, right? Like you're leveling up your chances in this crazy competitive world. So does RoleCatcher get into specifics? What are these algorithms actually looking for?
They do. For special forces officers, they highlight keywords: strategic planning, risk assessment, cross-cultural communication, even ethical decision-making.
Interesting.
It reflects the changing demands of those leadership roles. It's not just about being physically tough anymore.
Right. It's a lot more nuanced than that.
Exactly.
It makes sense, though. Higher you go, the bigger the picture, the more strategic you gotta be. Still blows my mind, AI being in the mix like this feels like we're, I don't know, on the verge of something big.
We might be. RoleCatcher even suggests practicing interview answers, but with AI feedback.
Whoa, really?
They have tools, analyze your delivery, your tone, even the content. So you're refining before you ever face a real person.
That is both incredibly cool and kind of terrifying. Like having a personal interview coach 24/7, but AI makes me wonder, though, even if AI gets you the job, can it prepare you for what it's really like? I mean, special forces, we're talking intense, high-pressure stuff.
You're right. And RoleCatcher doesn't, sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
That's one thing I appreciate, actually, how they handle the exciting stuff, but also the really challenging parts. They get into the nitty-gritty of leadership in those high-stakes environments.
What kind of insights do they offer on that? Can't be easy to lead when, lives are potentially on the line.
It's not. RoleCatcher really stresses that leadership here, it's beyond just giving orders. It's about building trust, fostering those strong teams, making tough calls, but with clarity and empathy. Imagine, right, having to make a split-second decision, your team's at risk.
Oh,
That's a
man.
level of responsibility most people never face.
Intense. You got to have a certain, I don't know, mental toughness for that. Does RoleCatcher talk about how that's developed?
They do, especially in their FAQs, actually. They cover some really human aspects,
Yeah.
like the impact on your personal life,
Ugh.
keeping relationships going, being away from family, that potential for strain.
It's not a 9 to 5, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
That kind of commitment, it takes a toll, even on the most dedicated person.
Absolutely. RoleCatcher really stresses open communication with loved ones, having that strong support system, and accepting that flexibility, adaptation, those are key. It's not just physical toughness, it's like emotional intelligence too.
That's a good point. We always think of, physical courage, but the emotional side, that resilience, that's huge. What other insights popped out from the FAQs? Anything surprise you?
Honestly,
Hmm.
the theme of ethical decision-making, it comes up a lot. They don't shy away from those morally gray areas that special forces officers might face.
Right, having to make those impossible choices.
Exactly. They talk about the code of conduct, adhering to that even in those ambiguous environments.
It's that classic dilemma, trying to do good in a world where the lines get blurry.
They mention psychological support systems, helping people process those experiences, and the importance of self-reflection, accountability, having a moral compass, but also constantly questioning your own actions.
Makes you think about like what kind of person is drawn to this, that mental, emotional fortitude. It's got to be intense. And it's more than a job at that point. It's, I don't know, a calling almost.
That's a good way to put it.
Ma-
And it makes me think about another thing RoleCatcher highlights, the transferability of those skills. We're not just talking about combat. It's about skills that are wanted in tons of fields.
Oh, that's interesting. So even if you don't stay in special forces forever, the experience is still valuable.
Oh, absolutely. They have a whole section, transferable skills, that get super specific.
Okay, give us the highlights.
One of the biggest, risk assessment. Constantly evaluating threats, analyzing outcomes, making decisions with limited info. That's huge in any field where you're under pressure. Finance, healthcare.
Makes sense. Being able to be the calm one when everyone else is freaking out, that's got to be valuable. What else?
Strategic planning. These guys, they're masters of thinking long-term, seeing the obstacles, making those plans.
Yeah.
That translates to leadership anywhere, business, government.
It's like they're wired for success no matter what they choose. Makes you wonder, is it something you're born with, or do you develop it through experience?
That's the question, right? Nature versus nurture. RoleCatcher seems to lean towards, it's a bit of both. You might be inclined towards certain things, but to really hone them in that pressure cooker takes effort, that willingness to learn, adapt.
This emphasis on learning, it's interesting. Do they get into specifics on how Special Forces officers stay at the top of their game?
They do. And it's not always what you'd think. They stress seeking out information, staying current on, like global affairs, even advanced degrees. Some even have master's, PhDs, international relations, political science.
Wow.
They become experts not just in tactics, but in the whole world.
Like real-life super spies, but with, like, intellectual depth. Do they give examples of that in action?
Yeah, they mentioned a scenario, a special forces team deployed to a remote village conflict zone.
Mm-hmm.
Their missions to gather intel, build relationships with leaders. But to do that, they needed to understand the culture, the history, even the local dialects. It wasn't just about being tough. It was about being adaptable, building trust in a really, really tough spot.
That's wild. It really shows those layers to these roles, that deep understanding of people, navigating those social dynamics, not just military strategy, but diplomacy, cultural understanding, building bridges in like the most challenging situations.
Exactly. RoleCatcher nails that aspect.
Yeah. It's a far cry from just like soldiers following orders. These are people thinking on their feet, adapting, making decisions that could have a huge impact.
And communicating those decisions. They highlight that. Clear, concise communication within the team, but also with locals. Being able to explain complex things, simply getting everyone on board.
Fascinating to get this peek behind the curtain. Makes you wonder, what kind of mind thrives in that world? The personality traits, what are those?
They don't give a specific profile, but they hint at things. Adaptable, resilient, calm under pressure, comfortable with uncertainty, quick thinkers, able to, problem solve in the thick of it.
It's like a paradox almost. Comfortable being uncomfortable, strategic but also tactical, a leader who's also a team player. So do they say if these are innate or developed?
It's both, really.
Ah.
RoleCatcher's big on this. They say, yeah, some folks are just drawn to this life, but the training, the experiences, that's what really shapes you. It's about pushing those limits, learning from when things go wrong, and always getting better.
So it's finding the right people, but then giving them what they need to, like, really excel.
Exactly. And that's what's so inspiring about this whole thing, right?
Hmm.
It's not just about fighting. It's about human potential, what we're capable of, physically, mentally, the whole package.
Makes you think bigger picture,
Mm.
like those lessons learned under pressure, could they apply to other stuff, climate change, global health, even just like dealing with a crazy boss,
Like,
that kind of resilience.
imagine that level of thinking applied to problems like that.
It's kind of hopeful, actually, and it brings us back to like the whole point of this deep dive.
Mhm.
Behind all the special forces stereotypes, you've got real people, skills, smarts, and this commitment to something bigger than themselves.
Well said. And that's what gets lost sometimes,
Yeah.
especially with all this talk about AI, algorithms. Easy to get caught up in the tech, but it's still people making the calls.
Speaking of tech, we got to touch on something else RoleCatcher mentions. Drones, autonomous weapons, that stuff. Does that change things? Do we even need humans in special forces anymore?
That's the million-dollar question right now. RoleCatcher, they have a take on it. It's interesting. They seem to think tech's going to keep changing things, obviously, but that human element, that'll always be essential.
So not humans versus machines, but like figuring out how they work together.
Exactly. Tech is a tool, right?
Hmm.
Not a replacement for judgment, intuition, all that human stuff. They talk about needing people who can bridge that gap. Tech, A&D, human interaction. That's how you handle these complex situations.
So like a new breed of special forces, comfortable with code A&D combat.
There you go. And that circles back to, like, never stop learning. RoleCatcher hits on that a lot. To thrive in this world, got to be curious, able to adapt, embrace new stuff.
It's not just being strong or even a brilliant tactician, it's the mindset. Got to be ready to grow, to change.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's a lesson for all of us, right? This
Yeah.
world's not slowing down, so being able to learn, adapt, that's key.
So we've gone deep on special forces. What's the one thing you want listeners to take away? The thing that sticks with them?
One thing, don't underestimate the human spirit. Tech changes, plans change, but it's that, I don't know, the courage, the compassion, believing in something bigger, that's what makes the real difference. On the battlefield or off, that's worth fighting for.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We've gone from like intense training to high-tech gadgets to really thinking about what makes people tick. It's been a journey.
It has. Big thanks to RoleCatcher for these awesome materials. And for everyone listening, if you want to learn more about this or any career that sparks your interest, go check out RoleCatcher.com.
And hit us up with your questions. We love hearing them. What do you want to dive into next? Until then, stay curious out there.
And keep exploring.
Catch you on the next Deep Dive.